Online misinformation has directly impacted elections for several years, and it continues to be a factor. Voters in Ukraine, Israel, and India are all participating in key elections that could change the direction of their respective countries.
But all three countries have serious issues with social media, from actual hacking to campaigns spreading lies about other candidates. And as Facebook policies change, so do the tactics.
Joining us now for more on this is CNET senior producer Dan Patterson. So Dan, this issue is a real one for many countries, and it has real-world, real-life implications. For example, in India, there is so much hate being spewed directly leading up to this really important election in India that it's hard. I think the Indian government themselves are struggling to get a handle on what's going on. The spread of misinformation, the spread of hate online.
Yeah, so get used to that phrase, coordinated inauthentic activity or misinformation. So what we saw in India is really a scale that is kind of new. So we see democratic elections happen all over the world. And when I spoke to the UN this last week, they said, look, some of this stuff that's coming out of India surprises even us, even though we monitor misinformation all around the world. Some of the images were pulled out of video games, and they were combined with images and video that was from unrelated deaths of unrelated activities, but it was tied to political messaging, and right now we don't know who the threat actors are disseminating that information.
So that's in India. Can we talk about Ukraine, right? They just had an election. There was a lot of concern that Russia would attempt to meddle. We know that Putin considers Ukraine part of his sphere of influence and has meddled before. They're very practiced at it. How did, or do we know what Russia did or may have done with this most recent election in Ukraine?
So the first thing we should say is that it looks like the Ukrainian election on Monday was successful. So in spite of foreign meddling, or what could be foreign meddling, the Ukrainians had a fantastic and successful election. The meddling that happened there, though, was an evolution of these influence campaign type of attacks. In the past, we have seen bots, which are inauthentic accounts. They're made at large scale and designed to post lots of content to kind of flood the zone. What happened in Ukraine, or at least what's alleged to have happened, is that Ukrainians were actually renting out their social media accounts. So these are legitimate profiles that there were some transactions that occurred that allowed real threat actors to use real profiles to disseminate propaganda.
So that obviously would get around any sort of social media platform that has developed an algorithm to identify fake pages, because these are legitimate pages just spewing out someone else's messaging. Yeah,
so Facebook does get a lot of flack on this, but they have also done quite a few maneuvers in the last 18 months or so to tamp down on coordinated inauthentic activity. But this is an evolution that is just kind of hard to figure out. How do we write an algorithm that kind of silences you for a little while, while you were under attack or renting out your account? It's
an algorithm to give the actual owner of the page morals, like don't rent out your page for someone else's propaganda. But I digress. I've said it throughout this whole conversation. It's us. We're the problem.
Right. Well, now to Israel. So the prime minister there, Benjamin Netanyahu, he's up for re-election. He's been using social media, and his opponents are using it as well.
Correct. What has also happened in Israel are several hundred accounts that have spread from Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, across the social web that are in support of Netanyahu. Now, we should say that there is right now no evidence that links these accounts and this propaganda to Netanyahu's campaign or to him personally. And there are many actors who could have a shared agenda with him. So there are many motivations behind these potential hackers. But really, Anne-Marie, it goes back to what you said a moment ago, that really this is more cognitive hacking than it is a technical or a social media hack. Right. It's really exploiting the things that make us want to click like, click share, and engage with social media accounts.
So is this a preview of 2020 for us? I mean, are we basically seeing these sort of bad actors experimenting, working out all the kinks, and we'll probably see these sort of tactics implemented here?
Yeah, we can absolutely expect to see influence campaign tactics happen in not just future U.S. elections, but around the world. Let's always keep in mind that the United States is not the only democratic institution in the world, but that we are also not the only democratic institution under attack.
Good point.
So there's one other thing that Facebook is doing that I think a lot of people have suggested that they might do, and they've just sort of announced it. Mark Zuckerberg did in an interview in Germany. They've announced that they're going to create this news feature with what they're calling, quote, high-quality journalism pieces. What do they mean by high quality, and how does it work? What does it mean for legacy news organizations? What is Facebook's intention here?
Well, they have indicated, Facebook has indicated that they will work with legacy media organizations and add a vetted tab. So you'll see information that is, air quotes, high quality. Now, this kind of brings up an interesting brand challenge. Does that mean that everything else is not high quality? But what you will expect to see there are news items and news content from sources like the New York Times, Washington Post, the LA Times, CBS News, and other outlets that has kind of passed through the Facebook vetting process.
Is this meant to be like an Apple News, or I still use Flipboard, which is like, I think one of the great, and people look at me and they're like, people still use Flipboard. It's a great way to curate a lot of different things that you read. Is it like that, or is it meant to be that Facebook becomes almost the brand of journalism, even though it's coming from the New York Times?
Hey, news is back, baby. Apple News, Amazon is putting out a new news product, Facebook. So news is trendy in cycles, and right now it's trendy again.
You know, this is what I see with that idea. I think it's a good idea. But part of the problem with sort of this misinformation and fake news is that, you know, often the people that share it have a distrust of mainstream news.
Absolutely.
They are deliberately rejecting these so-called high-quality news providers.
Right.
And so I don't know if those people will seek out this option.
Yeah, because people who are already, I've always been shocked. I was shocked a couple of years ago to learn from people that they get their news from Facebook, right? And it's what you say. They are not getting their news from the New York Times or the Washington Post or CBS News because they feel, for whatever reasons, the mainstream media has not, or is not covering the things that they're interested in. And so why would you, within the ecosystem of Facebook, go to the New York Times if you are reading your news from Facebook because you left the New York Times?
Well, what this could do is increase what we call passive discovery. So although you may kind of have a posture of, well, the mainstream news doesn't speak for me, if you encounter news that is at least reported and has some time and consideration put into it, you may be exposed more routinely to something that is what they are calling higher quality.
So you find it in your news feed, so you're likely to read it, versus the way the algorithm has been working before is the more sort of garbage you read, the more
or you may
more garbage you get on your news feed. That's my, editorializing of it.
Right. Well, you may not have elected to follow, say, the New York Times or the Washington Post initially, but if you have passive discovery, you will still encounter that type of content.
Right. Very interesting, Dan Patterson.